A sister's public humiliation turns into empowerment. Reddit family drama. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we dive into a powerful Reddit family drama that highlights the emotional turmoil one person experiences within their family. A story filled with betrayal, mockery, and unexpected courage. If you've ever found yourself in a Reddit family drama, this video will resonate with you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Silent Wars for more emotional and thought-provoking stories. Amelia never imagined that humiliation could be dressed in such elegance wrapped in silk and champagne. The wedding was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration of love and family. But for Amelia, it felt like a stark reminder of everything she had never been able to be a part of the perfect, polished world her younger sister Ella effortlessly belonged to. Sitting in the third row, Amelia adjusted her dress, the only formal one she owned, and tried to blend into the crowd of impeccably dressed guests. Her son, Luca, was beside her, his tiny hands tugging at his suit jacket, his legs swinging excitedly under the table. At just 8 years old, Luca had no idea what it felt like to be ignored or overlooked by those who were supposed to love you unconditionally. He looked up at his mother with such pride, his innocent belief that this day might finally make them feel like they were truly part of the family again. Amelia tried to believe that too, hoping the wedding would be a turning point, an opportunity to reconnect with the family that had never fully embraced her. But no matter how hard she tried, Amelia felt like a shadow in the presence of Ella. Her younger sister, always the golden child, floated through the day with an effortless grace, receiving all the compliments and attention. Her beauty and charm made her the center of the room, basking in the admiration of everyone, especially their mother. Ella had always been the one who had it all: looks, success, and the ability to make everything she did seem effortless. Amelia couldn't help but feel invisible, standing in the background while her sister shone brightly in the spotlight. Amelia had spent her whole life trying to get noticed, to be seen, to feel valued. But for years, the only time she was acknowledged was when she was compared to Ella. Amelia was the one who had learned to live in the shadows, quietly enduring the long hours, the sacrifices, and the loneliness that came with being the overlooked one. She had worked tirelessly to raise Luca on her own, juggling multiple jobs, sacrificing her own dreams and desires to give him the best life she could. She had hoped her family would see that, but instead, they saw a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, while Ella was held up as the example of everything that was good and successful in their family. Despite the feeling of being invisible, Amelia showed up. She smiled and clapped at the right moments, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, she was seething with frustration, her heart aching with the realization that no matter what she did, she would never be able to fill the role her family had designed for her. They expected nothing from her but to stay quiet, to blend in, to be the strong, independent sister who didn't need love or attention. It was as if her existence had become a footnote in the grand story of her family's idealized narrative. The most painful part of all was the lack of acknowledgement from the very people who should have been the first to cheer her on. Her mother, who had always been the cornerstone of the family, didn't even glance her way, while Ella soaked up every compliment and adoration. Amelia had long since stopped hoping for her mother's approval, but it still stung, more than she cared to admit. She had lived her whole life wondering what it would feel like to be truly seen, truly loved, and not just as an afterthought. But it seemed that moment would never come. Amelia had hoped, for just a moment, that this time, at her sister Ella's wedding, things might finally be different. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the day when she would feel accepted, included, or even seen for who she really was. As Ella took the microphone to make her speech, Amelia braced herself for something warm, something that would lift the weight of years of living in the shadow of her sister's perfection. Perhaps Ella would speak about their childhood, about the bond they shared as sisters. Maybe she would even mention how proud she was of Amelia, how she admired her strength as a single mother, juggling work, life, and her son. But what Amelia didn't expect, what she never could have predicted, was the cruelty that would spill from Ella's mouth. Instead of a heartfelt message, Ella began her speech with a sharp, mocking tone. "I just want to say something special about my big sister," she said, her smile widening as she made eye contact with Amelia. Amelia's heart clenched in anticipation, a flicker of hope igniting within her, but it quickly turned to disbelief as Ella's words hit like a cold slap to the face. "She's a role model, you know," Ella continued, her voice oozing with sarcasm. "She's strong, independent, and clearly unwanted by anyone else." The words hung in the air for a moment before the room erupted into laughter. It wasn't a light chuckle or a playful tease, it was loud, raucous, and sharp. The kind of laughter that cut through the air like a blade, leaving Amelia's skin burning with humiliation. She could barely breathe as her stomach twisted in knots. She had heard her sister criticize her before, but this felt different. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't playful sibling rivalry. It was something deeper, something cruel. Amelia's heart sank as she looked at Luca, her 8-year-old son, who was sitting beside her, his innocent face full of confusion. His small brows furrowed as he glanced from his mother to the crowd, trying to understand why everyone was laughing at her. Amelia wanted to run, to grab Luca by the hand and leave that room. She wanted to take him away from the mocking, the cruelty, and the judgment. She could feel the weight of their stares, their laughter, pressing down on her chest like an iron bar. But she couldn't move. She couldn't leave, not yet. Her legs felt like they were cemented to the floor, and her hands trembled uncontrollably in her lap. She glanced around the room, desperately hoping for someone, anyone, to speak up, to step in and stop the hurt. But there was no one. Not even her mother, who had been watching the whole thing unfold, showed any sign of disapproval. The laughter grew louder, the sting deeper. It felt as though the whole room was turning on her, turning her into a punchline. For a moment, Amelia couldn't breathe. She had spent her life fighting for respect, for recognition, for validation. And here it was, stripped away in an instant. She was no longer a sister, a mother, or a woman. She was the butt of a cruel joke. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the humiliation suffocating her, and she just wanted to disappear. But in that moment, the only thing that kept her grounded was Luca's innocent face, his quiet whisper of confusion. "Why did she say that about you, Mama?" And that question, spoken with pure honesty, broke something deep inside her. Amelia sat there, paralyzed by the mockery, her chest tight with the sting of laughter that echoed in her ears. Just when she thought she couldn't bear the weight of the humiliation any longer, something unexpected happened. It wasn't a loud outburst, a fight, or even a defensive word from her. Instead, it was the groom, Callum, who stood up. His action alone was enough to stop the room in its tracks. He wasn't standing to defend Ella, nor was he stepping in to diffuse the tension with another joke or light-hearted comment. Callum's posture was different. His shoulders were tense, his face drawn in disappointment, mixed with something deeper, something far more intense than Amelia could have expected from him. The room fell into an almost eerie silence as Callum's eyes scanned the room. For a moment, no one moved. No one dared to speak. It was as if the very air in the room had been sucked out, leaving everyone frozen in place, unsure of what would come next. And then Callum spoke. His voice, calm yet firm, sliced through the tension. "I can't just sit here and let this happen," he said, the words steady but filled with unmistakable weight. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't trying to make light of the situation. His expression was serious, his gaze unwavering. What just happened isn't funny, it's not a joke, it's cruel. Amelia's heart raced, her breath caught in her throat as Callum continued. He didn't hesitate for a second. You mocked Amelia for being a single mother. You laughed at her for raising her child on her own, with no support, no partner. You laughed at her strength, her resilience, and you let everyone in this room believe that was something to ridicule. His words rang out, sharp and clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Callum's disappointment was palpable, and his tone carried an undeniable anger. He wasn't just calling out the jokes, they were nothing compared to the deeper issue. He was calling out the entire room, all of them, for standing by and allowing it to happen. For a second, it felt like time stood still. The guests, once laughing and chatting, now sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between Callum, Amelia, and the rest of the room. Some looked uncomfortable, others shocked, and a few even looked embarrassed, realizing the weight of what Callum had just said. The atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a wedding reception, it was a moment of reckoning. Callum wasn't just standing up for Amelia. He was calling out the cruelty of a family that had built its foundation on judgment and silence. The tension that had filled the room just moments before had been replaced with an uneasy stillness. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to react. Some, who had been quick to laugh just moments earlier, now avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of the gravity of what had unfolded. This wasn't about defending Amelia's honor as a sister. It was about standing up against a toxic family dynamic that had allowed this kind of cruelty to go unchallenged for far too long. Callum's words had opened a door that had remained closed for years. Amelia had spent her life fighting for recognition, fighting to be seen, and yet here, in this moment, someone had finally spoken the truth. The truth wasn't just in the words spoken, it was in the simple act of calling out what should have never been allowed to happen. And as Callum stood there, facing the stunned guests, he didn't wait for anyone to respond. He didn't need approval. His action had already spoken louder than any words ever could. For the first time in a long while, Amelia didn't feel alone in that room. Callum's support wasn't just about defending her, it was about validating her strength, her dignity, and her place in this world, even if her own family had failed to see it. It was a moment of power, and it shook everyone in that room to their core. The weight of the humiliation, the years of being invisible, and the mockery from her own family had built up inside Amelia like a dam waiting to burst. She had spent too many years sitting in silence, trying to keep her head down and make peace with being overlooked. But that moment, at her sister's wedding, was the tipping point. Callum's defense had cracked the dam wide open, and now Amelia knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. With her heart still pounding from the shock of Callum's words, Amelia stood up. She didn't know where the strength came from, but it surged through her like a wave. She wasn't just standing for herself anymore, she was standing for Luca, for the years of silence she had endured, for the shame she had swallowed in order to keep the peace. She held Luca's small hand tightly, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the one person in this world who had never doubted her, never made her feel small. Amelia took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she had left. She didn't look back at her family, whose faces were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and anger. The room had fallen silent again, but this time, it was different. The laughter was gone. The uncomfortable whispers were silenced. Amelia felt the weight of her family's indifference, the way they had treated her for years, pressing down on her like a 100-pound weight. But she wasn't going to let that burden carry her any longer. She was done. With a quiet, steady voice, Amelia spoke, breaking the silence with the only words she needed to say. I've been carrying this family for too long, and for once, I'm done. I'm done trying to prove myself to people who can't even see me for who I am." Her words hung in the air, piercing through the room. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need to. Her family's reaction didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that for the first time in years, Amelia was reclaiming her dignity. She wasn't going to let them make her feel small again. Not today. As she turned to leave, she could feel her chest swell with something she hadn't felt in so long: freedom. The weight of years of disappointment and self-doubt started to lift. She walked out of the room, holding Luca's hand firmly in her own, stepping past her family as they sat frozen in shock. Their words of shame, their anger, and their guilt echoed in the background, but Amelia didn't hear them anymore. She was done with their judgments, done with their expectations. For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt like she could breathe. The shame she had carried for years was gone, replaced with a deep sense of pride and self-respect. She wasn't leaving because she was ashamed. She was leaving because she had finally taken control of her own narrative. As the door closed behind her, Amelia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was free. She didn't need her family's approval. She didn't need them to validate her. What mattered now was that she had her own back. She had Luca's back. And that was enough. As Callum walked out of the reception hall, something profound happened. The tension in the room was palpable, and it felt as if the very air had changed. The laughter that had echoed just moments before, the cruel, sharp laughter at Amelia's expense, vanished like a snap of a finger. The whispers that had followed her throughout the evening, whispers of mockery, judgment, and pity, quieted, leaving a heavy, uneasy silence in their wake. Amelia stood there, holding Luca's hand, her heart still racing from the sudden shift in dynamics. For the first time in years, she was not the one feeling small. She wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of her family's expectations, their dismissive remarks, and their scorn. No, now she felt different. She felt taller, more solid, more powerful. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was standing tall, and the world was watching. As Amelia walked out of the reception, a sense of freedom washed over her. It was as if she was finally breaking free from the chains of the past, from the years of being belittled and ignored by those who were supposed to love her. She wasn't leaving in shame. She wasn't running away in defeat. She was walking away with her head held high, knowing that she had made the right choice. The video of Callum standing up for Amelia quickly spread across the internet. It wasn't just a video of a groom defending his fiancée's family. It was a story of public validation, a story of someone standing up to cruelty, someone stepping into the light when all they had ever known was the shadow. Within hours, the video had gained tens of thousands of views. The comments flooded in, praising Callum for his bravery, for his strength, for doing what no one in Amelia's family had done before. People online were cheering him on, applauding his decision to stand up for what was right. Amelia, for the first time, felt seen. She wasn't invisible anymore. The world wasn't blind to her pain. People were recognizing her worth not because she had demanded it, but because they had witnessed the truth unfold. They had seen the cruelty of her family, and they had witnessed Callum's defense, a defense that was as much for Amelia as it was for her son. The validation, though unexpected, was overwhelming. It was like a breath of fresh air after suffocating in silence for years. In that moment, Amelia understood something she had never truly believed before, that her value wasn't defined by the people who had mistreated her. It wasn't defined by her family's dismissive behavior or by the cruel words spoken in the name of family humor. Her worth was innate, and now, finally, the world was beginning to recognize it. She was more than the punchline of a cruel joke. She was more than the neglected older sister. She was Amelia strong, independent, and worthy of love and respect. As the story of Callum's defense continued to spread, Amelia's confidence grew. She wasn't the silent, invisible woman in the background anymore. She was taking back her power, reclaiming her dignity, and embracing her truth. And this was just the beginning. With each passing moment, she was learning to live for herself, not for her family's approval, not for anyone's validation, but for the strength she had found within herself. She had finally stepped into the light, and nothing would ever make her shrink back into the shadows again. In the aftermath of the wedding, Amelia's family tried their best to downplay the situation. They attempted to minimize what had happened, pretending like it was just a momentary lapse in judgment, a joke gone too far. But the truth had already been revealed. It didn't matter how much they tried to brush it under the rug or spin the narrative in their favor. Amelia was no longer playing their game. She had spent so many years chasing after their love, seeking their approval, trying to earn the recognition she so desperately craved. But something had shifted that night, and she had finally realized something profound. She no longer needed them to validate her. The years of quiet sacrifice, of being the daughter who always put others first, the one who stayed in the background while her sisters shone in the spotlight, had taken their toll. Amelia had learned how to live for everyone else, bending herself into whatever shape she thought would make her family love her. She had bent so far, in fact, that she forgot what it was like to stand tall for herself. But that had changed. After everything she'd endured, after watching her family mock her at the wedding, Amelia realized that no amount of sacrifice or appeasing would ever make her family see her for who she truly was. This was no longer about trying to win their affection or fit into their mold of what they thought she should be. It wasn't about seeking their approval, hoping that one day they would recognize her value. No, Amelia had finally come to understand that her worth didn't come from her family's recognition. Her value was not tied to their validation, nor would she let them define her any longer. She wasn't the self-sacrificing daughter they had always expected her to be. She wasn't the one who would stand by, silently taking the hurt and humiliation for the sake of family harmony. That was not her role anymore. She had spent too many years shrinking, staying quiet and playing the role of the overlooked daughter. She had carried the weight of their indifference, constantly striving to prove herself worthy of their love. But it had all been in vain. The more she tried to win their love, the more invisible she became. But now, Amelia understood that real love that was genuine and respectful, didn't come from being someone else's idea of who you should be. It didn't come from silence, self-sacrifice, or appeasing those who never truly saw you. Amelia wasn't interested in revenge. She wasn't out to hurt anyone or make them regret their actions. It wasn't about striking back or getting even. It was about something much more powerful, reclaiming her own sense of worth. She was done with playing the part of the overlooked daughter. She was done seeking approval from those who had never given it to her. For the first time in a long time, Amelia was standing up for herself, not out of anger, but out of the deep, quiet knowing that she had always been enough. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She knew who she was and what she deserved. In that moment, as she walked away from her family and the toxic expectations they had placed on her, Amelia felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't looking for anyone's applause or validation. She had learned to validate herself, and that was all that mattered. She had finally broken the silence that had kept her small for so long, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her worth. In the days that followed the wedding, the aftermath was dramatic. Amelia's family, desperate to smooth things over, reached out to her. Calls, messages, and emails flooded in. But Amelia, with a clarity she had never felt before, refused to engage. She wasn't interested in their explanations or apologies. She had already come to terms with something that had been hidden from her for far too long. Her family, while related by blood, had never truly shown her the respect she deserved. For years, she had believed that family meant unconditional support, love, and understanding. But what she had endured time and time again proved otherwise. Their version of love had always been conditional. It was a love that only existed when she fulfilled their needs, when she was the one carrying the burden, when she was the one giving without ever receiving in return. Amelia was the one who had always been expected to show up, to take on more responsibility, to make the sacrifices, and to endure their judgments. But when it came to her, there was always a disconnect, always a sense that she wasn't quite enough, unless she was giving more. She had spent so many years pouring herself into the role they had assigned her, desperately trying to earn their affection, trying to live up to their expectations, and it had left her exhausted. In return, she had received empty praise and the silent treatment when she didn't play the part they wanted. Amelia had given everything, and yet, when it came down to it, the love they claimed to have for her was always conditional on her ability to provide for their needs. It wasn't love, it was an obligation, an expectation, and a manipulation disguised as affection. For the first time in her life, Amelia chose herself. She realized that no one, not even her family, had the right to define her worth or demand anything from her. She had spent so much time worrying about their feelings, about being the person they wanted her to be, that she had forgotten to consider her own needs. But in the wake of the wedding, as she finally stood up for herself and walked away, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The guilt that had plagued her for years, guilt for not being enough, guilt for not doing more, guilt for not being who they wanted her to be, started to fade. Amelia knew it wasn't going to be easy. Her family wasn't going to suddenly understand or accept her decision. They would try to convince her that she was overreacting, that she should come back into the fold, and that everything could go back to the way it was. But deep down, Amelia knew the truth. Their relationship had never been healthy, and it was time to set boundaries that would allow her to thrive instead of constantly being drained by their expectations. In choosing herself, Amelia wasn't rejecting her family. She was rejecting the toxic patterns that had been ingrained in her for so long. She was finally embracing the fact that she had the right to live her life on her terms, without constantly having to prove herself or sacrifice her well-being for the sake of others. For the first time, Amelia felt like she was free to be who she truly was, without the shame, the guilt, or the expectations that had defined her for so many years. And in that freedom, she found strength, power, and a sense of peace that she had never known before. Weeks passed, and the dust from the wedding debacle finally began to settle. Amelia had walked away from the hurt, the laughter, the judgment, and with each passing day she grew stronger. In those quiet moments of reflection, she began to realize something she hadn't fully understood before. Being alone didn't mean she was unwanted. In fact, it meant she was free. For so long, Amelia had equated solitude with loneliness. She had believed that without her family's validation, without their recognition, she was somehow incomplete. But in the wake of her bold decision to walk away from their cruelty and indifference, she began to see that being alone was not a burden, it was a liberation. She wasn't missing anything by stepping away from a family who had treated her as less than, who had made her feel small and invisible for so many years. In truth, she had been giving them too much power over her life. She had been letting their treatment of her define her worth. As the weeks wore on, Amelia found herself rediscovering her own sense of identity. She no longer had to silence herself to make room for others. No longer did she need to shrink into the background to accommodate her sister's perfection or her mother's expectations. Amelia was standing in her own truth now, and it felt good. It felt like a victory, not a loss. For years, she had longed for the love and recognition that seemed to come so easily to Ella. She had hoped that one day, her family would really see her for the strong, capable, and independent woman she had become. But as the weeks passed, Amelia realized that the love and recognition she had longed for from her family weren't necessary anymore. She had found it within herself. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Amelia had spent so much of her life waiting for validation from others, whether it was her family's approval, a friend's affirmation, or a partner's support. Now she understood that the only validation she needed was her own. The truth was that she had always been worthy. She had always been strong. And for the first time, she believed that she was enough just as she was. The more she embraced this new sense of self-worth, the more confident she became in her decisions. She no longer second-guessed herself. She no longer felt like an imposter in her own life. Amelia had spent years playing the role of the self-sacrificing daughter, always putting her family's needs before her own, always trying to win their approval. But now, she was reclaiming her power, and it felt incredible. With each passing day, Amelia's life became more about her own desires, her own dreams, and her own happiness. She took pride in her work, her accomplishments, and the life she was building for herself and Luca. She didn't need her family to validate her anymore. She had done it herself. She was no longer waiting for anyone else to fill the gaps that she had spent so many years trying to fill with their love. Instead, she had learned how to love herself, fully and completely. Amelia no longer felt the weight of guilt that had once hung over her shoulders. She didn't feel the need to explain her choices to anyone. The silence and the distance from her family had created the space she needed to reconnect with herself. And in that silence, she discovered the truth: she was not broken. She was not incomplete. She was whole. And she was enough. As the months passed, Amelia's life took on a new rhythm. She found joy in the simple moments, like watching Luca grow and thrive, or savoring quiet evenings alone, reflecting on her journey. And while she was still estranged from her family, there was no longing in her heart. There was no bitterness, only a quiet peace, knowing that she had made the right choice for herself. Amelia's victory was quiet, but it was powerful. She had learned to stand on her own, to find strength in her solitude, and to reclaim her worth. In the end, she realized that the love she had been searching for had always been inside her. She didn't need anyone else to give it to her, and that, in itself, was the greatest victory of all. Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past begin to lift as she looked toward the future. For the first time in years, she felt free not just from the cruel mockery of her family, but from the expectations that had always loomed over her, shaping every decision she made. For so long, she had measured her worth by their standards, trying to meet their expectations, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. But now, as she stood at the threshold of a new chapter in her life, she realized that her worth could no longer be defined by others. It was hers to claim. The sacrifices she had made for her family, sacrifices of time, of love, of energy, had been vast. But they were now behind her. She had spent years putting her family's needs before her own, always prioritizing them, always trying to prove that she could be the perfect daughter, the perfect mother, the perfect everything. But the truth was that perfection had never been the goal. All she had really wanted was to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved, not for what she could give, but for who she was. And now, as she turned away from her family's judgment, she realized that the love she had longed for could only come from within herself. Amelia knew that this new beginning wasn't going to be without sacrifice. She had already lost the family she once desperately tried to please. The walls she had built between herself and her family were now concrete, hardened by years of mistreatment and neglect. She understood that there would be no easy way to bridge that gap. But she also knew that in order to create the life she truly wanted, one that was full of self-respect, self-love, and authenticity, She had to make that sacrifice. It was a choice, and it was the only choice that made sense for her. The greatest victory wasn't the public defense or the applause from strangers who rallied behind her. The greatest victory was the quiet realization that her dignity, once reclaimed, could never be taken away from her again. She didn't need anyone else to give her permission to stand tall. She didn't need their approval to know that she was worthy. For too long, she had allowed her family's view of her to dictate how she saw herself. But now, she had taken back control. As Amelia looked ahead, she saw a future full of possibilities. She no longer felt the need to shrink herself to fit into a family that had never truly understood her. She no longer felt the need to apologize for her choices or hide the parts of herself that had been misunderstood or ignored. She had learned that true strength came from standing in her own truth, from setting boundaries, and from walking away from anything or anyone that did not honor her worth. Her journey wasn't over, but it was no longer defined by the past. The future was hers to create. She had learned that happiness and peace didn't come from other people's approval, they came from within. And in this new beginning, Amelia was determined to build a life on her own terms, one that was driven by her values, her dreams, and her unwavering belief that she was enough. The sacrifices had been hard, but the freedom she felt in that moment standing strong, knowing that her dignity could never be taken away, was worth every bit of it. Amelia had finally stepped into the life she deserved. And with every step forward, she knew that her worth was no longer in question. It was solid, unshakable, and wholly her own. One of the most profound lessons from Amelia's journey is the importance of reclaiming one's self-worth and dignity, regardless of the opinions or judgments of others. Throughout her life, Amelia had been undervalued, overlooked, and even humiliated by her family, yet she found the strength to stand up for herself when it mattered most. The story reminds us that our value isn't defined by the approval of others, but by how we see ourselves. As we grow older, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing we must prove ourselves to those around us, whether it's family, friends, or society. But true peace and fulfillment come from within, accepting ourselves, setting healthy boundaries, and knowing that we deserve respect, love, and dignity simply for being who we are. The freedom Amelia felt when she stopped seeking validation from her family is a powerful reminder for all of us. It's never too late to embrace our worth, to let go of the need for approval, and to live authentically. In the golden years of life, it's essential to honor ourselves, celebrate the wisdom we've gained, and remember that we are enough, just as we are. Thank you for watching this emotional Reddit family drama unfold. We hope Amelia's story left you with a sense of empowerment and strength. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to Silent Wars for more heartfelt stories. Your support means a lot to us, and we can't wait to bring you more content that resonates with you.